Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. We're going to get right down to it today. We are going to be talking about how to put together murder mystery campaigns, the whodunits, the who had the motive, what's the who, what, when, where, and why of it all. Putting it together for your campaigns can make for some compelling stories and interesting, involving, and most importantly, engaging non-combat plot lines and stories for your players to dive into. Now, this isn't to say that there can't be some combat, some fighting, maybe even an epic showdown at the end, depending on the context of your setting and the type of story you want to tell. But I think if you've been following this channel for even a little bit now, you'll understand that for me, I like to mix in a little bit of everything. I love having great and epic combat. Just those great conflagrations just really do just so much to engage and sell the story to your players. And players, for their part, are eager to just eat that up. And I'm no exception to that. But doing the same thing over and over again, although you can make combat interesting with a variety of terrains, enemies, and employing different tactics and forcing the players to keep on their toes, it's still, I find that it's important to mix things up and engage things because, well, not every enemy wants to engage in direct combat. For many people, the objective is just to get in, make the quick kill, or even just not even kill, just steal something and get back out without causing too much of a fuss, making too much of a scene, and just quietly melting back into the shadows, the act fomenting whatever next phase of their plans, or even if it was the crime was just the final objective in and of itself. These things present another aspect to the gameplay, and maybe they don't fit every gameplay style, but certainly considering throwing these into your stories will make things just a bit more interesting. And you can incorporate these in a multitude of different ways. For example, even if you're running a campaign about a war between two or more countries, or a great civil war like what you find in the Three Kingdoms setting we referenced before throughout the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games, or even the Dynasty Warriors game series, there's still plenty of murder mystery to be had. I mean, you have political intrigue, corrupt nobles in the court, the corrupt eunuchs, you have assassins being employed, murderers, thieves, and spies, and you can easily bring this element to a grand military campaign and integrate it nicely and smoothly. I mean, if there's this brilliant warrior, this absolutely unstoppable force on the battlefield, and the enemy army has sent champion after champion after them, and the warrior has only managed to bedeck themselves in greater glory through bloody conquest and victory over these myriad champions. It's utterly demoralizing for their army, especially if they just keep sending champions forward to be butchered in front of the rest of their army. It stops making sense to do that. So if they can't beat them directly, beat them by other means. How would you beat them in combat? At night, with a stick, while they sleep in bed. It doesn't pay to keep playing fairly in that case. Well, in certain respects it does, but you get the point that I'm trying to make here. For those leading great armies, big nations, victory is paramount, keeping the morale of the army is paramount, and continually sending some of your best fighters, and in some cases some of these best fighters are probably capable officers and generals as well, is only going to continue to cripple you, as you have to either try to find more generals and great leaders to recruit and great warriors, or train them up. And that takes time, and that gets expensive, and meanwhile your army's demoralized. So you employ assassins, kill them quietly in their sleep. You have a general who's leading the enemy armies to victory after victory. You can't rout them in the field, and trying to cut your way to them in the middle of a fight's difficult. So why not employ a few discreet assets, turn a few people, make some bribes here and there, some threats, kidnap a few families, all just to get an agent or a couple of agents in place in order to foment a series of steps in a plan, a covert plan, to rid yourself of this general. easy to incorporate into these grand strategy military campaigns, and definitely well worth doing so, especially if you're running the player's characters as an elite strike unit or a strike force, or the an elite team of soldiers. And these soldiers could be employed to solve this particular mystery, because these are people that have capabilities and minds and abilities far and above the normal rank and file soldier, even rank above some of the more elite shock troop units. Anyways, I digress. Whether you're running a grand strategy campaign or you're running a game about courtly intrigues, knowing how to put together a good mystery is important, whether it's stolen plans, stolen goods, valuables, artifacts, or murder mysteries. These are going to be compelling and engaging story elements. And the first thing that you need to set up is, of course, the crime itself. What is the crime? Is it a murder mystery? Is it stolen goods, stolen artifacts, all those other things that we mentioned before? Is it bribery or blackmail or kidnapping? You need to establish what the crime is in and of itself and have that focused in your mind. And then you can work outwards from there to begin to figure out the rest of the details. The most important thing, beyond having the crime itself, the crux, the central focal point that the players are going to be focusing on and starting their way from, is who's motivated to commit the crime. You can't have a whodunit without knowing who done it. So, who's motivated to do this? And really, ideally, especially if it's a competently put together crime, there should be multiple suspects that are in line for figuring out who had done this. Or in the case of a military campaign, it's clear who done it, or who was motivated to have this done, but you still need to find who specifically committed the deed. You find who specifically committed the deed means you can either unravel or have been unraveling the series of agents, turncoats, and people who've been threatened or bribed, and rooting out this weakness and conspiracy within your own military and command structure. But you need to know who done it, who actually committed the crime, and who's motivated to have that done. Now, sometimes the person that's committing the crime is the same person with the motivation. Sometimes those things are separate. Nobles, politicians, anybody with a modicum of power or resources, which resources are also power. Anyways, anybody with the resources to facilitate a crime being committed could have motivation for that crime to be committed, and then the person or persons who commit the crime will also have motivation. They're being paid to do it, or they have similar interests aligned with the person facilitating the crime to be committed. So you have a number of options for criminals to be apprehended, to be dealt with, or approached in whatever manner the players decide they're going to go about things. So we have the crime, when we have whodunit and motivation, and sometimes those two are locked together, so we're going to count that as the two primary things there: the crime itself, and then who did it and their motivation. Now, once we know the crime and who did it and what their motivation was, what we need next are clues for players to follow. And like I said, there should be, as far as who did it goes for the players, there should be multiple suspects at hand, multiple things for them to unravel and figure out as we go along in this, and there should be clues scattered about throughout the game. Now, clues can be sort of tricky. This is where I feel like a lot of mystery games can kind of get lost. They can be tricky to pull off because the clues, any witnesses, evidence, objects, or any number of things that you set out there that are supposed to be, in your mind, a clear trail of breadcrumbs for the players to follow along with as they make their skill checks and ask questions. It may be clear to you, the DM, the storyteller, that this is the trail, but it's not always going to be so readily apparent to the players. And not only that, but as I've discussed many, many times before, players are quick to spot plot holes, and they're also quick to spot or think of things that would make sense that you didn't think of, and will latch on to those things. They'll latch on to random NPCs, random ideas, or objects that they find. And the trick with this here is, and it's a difficult one, is to make everything work. Everything that the players come up with, even if the answer is sometimes a solid no, like say they latch onto, the scullery maid was in cahoots with the butler. They're the ones that murdered the lord in his bedchamber at night. I know it. All the evidence points that way. And yeah, maybe that makes sense. And you go, oh yeah, God, they would be a good fit for that too. I didn't think of that. And the trick is to figure out how to incorporate them into this. And the fastest way is usually it's a quick little, no, it wasn't them, but you don't want to just immediately close and shut the book on the players. You want to allow them that interaction, because if they're investigating, they're empowered to investigate, but they need to make sure they get the right person. And it should be emphasized that if they have the wrong person, crimes could potentially continue to happen, or these events that are massive setbacks will continue to happen until the players apprehend the right person. And so when they go to interact with, whether it's accusing or arresting this random NPC, the scullery maid and the butler, when they interact with them, it should come about like say they're interviewing the scullery maid, like they've dragged her to the jail cell, they're questioning her by whatever methods, and they have, whether it's a fantasy setting or a sci-fi or realistic setting, it should come out, ideally, that, through this interaction, like she goes, her innocence ends up being proved, but she reveals that another NPC in the household who was supposed to have been looked at more closely by the players, they can say, oh, the stable boy has been disgruntled for the last few weeks. He got a whipping for damaging the master's prize stallion. He was gelded when he wasn't supposed to be. This was supposed to be a stallion put out to stud and keep fostering on this rare, illustrious, and very valiant bloodline from the horses. It cost the Lord a fortune having that mistake happen, and so the stable boy was beaten severely, and that way, sure, the players latched onto the wrong thing, but now they have a new lead to follow. You made that work. It was a no that was wrong, but it wasn't just a dead end where you slammed the book shut on them and left the players trying to guess what it was you were thinking at the time when you were planning out this mystery. And that gets really, like I said, that gets really, really tricky to do, is trying to get into the mind of another person to figure out what the trail of breadcrumbs was. I mean, if any of you have played any of the old adventures games from the 90s on the computer, like any of the Monkey's Island games, it gets really obscure sometimes trying to figure out what exactly the developers and the designers of the games were thinking of at the time. And it can get a little bit frustrating and really boring, and that translates so easily into tabletop games as well, too. So be flexible and try to make everything work some way. It definitely requires a certain amount of adaptability and creativity on your part, especially if it's something that was unexpected. But even if you give the players a no, maybe you can reveal a few extra details that other household staff would have known and could give to the players. Like, oh yeah, there was a bad blood between them. The stable boy's been pissed off for months now. Go talk to him. He probably knows something. And it would be revealed, lo and behold, yes, the stable boy does know something. He's the one that let the murderers in the gate at night. And did he get a good look at them? Not closely, but he can identify certain features and looks, and then the players will have another step for what to look for, and they can follow the trail out through the gate that the stable boy had opened up for them. That's assuming that the stable boy is still alive. It's just a stable boy. Makes sense for the assassins to try to cover their tracks and either kidnap him or gut him as well. But still, even if they kill or kidnap the stable boy, that just reveals another step in the chain. A step in the chain for along this murder mystery for the characters to follow. So we have the crime itself, the whodunit, and needing to be flexible as you create these series of clues and events for the players to follow. And one thing I will say, as an exception to number 3, we'll call this point 4. So we have 4 things here. Go ahead and give the players a couple of red herrings. As like I said before, there should be, point 2, there should be a number of sufficiently motivated parties that could have been complicit in the crime somehow. And it's important for the players to kind of work along the evidence there and follow some of those things. Because even if, like I said before, being flexible is helpful in this. So if the players do follow a planned red herring, that's an instance where they've gone through a series of events and definitely followed a series of clues along something that makes sense, pointed at this guilty party, interrogated them or questioned them somehow, and found that, oh, no, it's not him. But if it's, say, one of 3 primary suspects that they have that could have facilitated the means to pay for the assassin to come in and murder the Lord in his manor, well, they've just marked off one of their 3 primary suspects and are down to 2 now. So they've eliminated a primary suspect. They have a chain of evidence that they're following, and they're narrowing down their list of suspects. They might be latching on to random things that that you didn't intend for them to latch on to, or didn't quite see how they might come to this conclusion, or it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Look at the butler and the scullery maid, people who had access and the means to let somebody into the house, or even commit the murder themselves. The chain of evidence should still point them back to this trail somehow, back to the primary suspects as they work their way and narrow it down. And at some point, it may even be acceptable for you to throw in an extra turn there. They run down all the lead suspects, and they find that, that once they get down to the last person, yes, he wanted the other lord murdered, and he was planning to do it himself, and so, he had a conspiracy to commit murder, so they bring in the suspect right there. But he wasn't the one that does it, and he keeps insisting it. All the evidence points and fits neatly with this particular character, but say they have some means, like in a fantasy setting, like some sort of zone of truth spell, or anything like that, where they can detect whether or not the target's lying, and just realize, oh wow, even under the compulsion of his spell, he's telling the truth. But it's still, this character is rich and powerful enough that he may have acquired some means of defeating the spell, or it's going to take us time to make sure we verify everything. We're going to hold him still anyways, but the real killer may still be loose out there. And at this point in the story, especially if you're dealing with like a larger grand court conspiracy or corporate conspiracy, whatever kind of, conspiracy, shadowy themed game you might be running, but maybe some of the players aren't so totally convinced, so they keep chasing down the chain of evidence and find, oh, the wife of the Lord, she found out he's been carrying on with a series of mistresses. They tried to deal with this problem before and renew their marriage, but he caught her in bed with somebody, or caught him in bed with somebody, apologies, and that just cut to the quick, just really just twisted that dagger in her heart. And in her rage, she tried to, things got stirred up and heated, and they've been estranged, but still living together and trying to work out their problems. But she pays this killer to come in and murder him, knowing that he's got a number of other rivals wanting to see him dead, possibly for sleeping with their wives or even their mistresses, as the case may be. Sorry, throwing out extra details there. I like thinking up stories. I'm sorry. But point being, there's the twist, there's the turn right there. It wasn't any of those three. There was a fourth person in the mix that things hadn't been revealed about. Maybe the household staff might have revealed that, but it's not all that uncommon for spouses to cheat on each other, and maybe it's something that the players overlooked. That one little detail that they just got lost amid the confusion and jumble of all this other evidence that pointed at these other characters. But the wife would have sufficient motivation in that case, would have the means and the resources, has plenty of red herrings to throw at the players, and can motivate the staff sufficiently that maybe they don't point to her right away. They point to everybody else, because if they all keep this quiet, they show and prove their loyalty, she knows they can trust them. They're going to be looking at a much better payday at the end of the day, at the end of all of this, which leaves them all under, conspiracy for murder and all of that. So all of that will really serve to make for a much more interesting murder mystery campaign, and a much more enjoyable mystery campaign. And the biggest thing is, again, I can't emphasize this enough, make everything work as you plan this out, because the players are going to be latching on and devouring every single clue, and as players are wont to do, they're going to latch onto and get attached to certain ideas and stories that they're forming in their own heads about the NPCs and what happened, and that might be contrary to what you had in mind. So you either need to incorporate it somehow, or find a way to tell them no, but point them back in the path, so that way it feels like they're making progress, even if the story you had in mind was supposed to go up, left, back over right, up, down, over again, and instead they go up, around, left, right, back down, back around again, and whatever loops and trails that the players are going to follow. You need to try to find a way to steer them gently back on. It's not quite railroading per se, because you're still letting them find their own way. It's just a little bit of course correction, more like shifting the winds for a sailing ship and getting them back on course to get to the correct destination. The journey might have wound around a bit more than what you had initially intended, but in the end, it's going to make for a much better story, a much more enjoyable story, and should lead to moments that players will talk about for years to come afterwards. With that said, if you like this video, please consider giving me a like and subscribe. And if you do like this video and you do subscribe to the channel, consider hitting that bell icon there, so that way you get notified the next time I upload content to this channel here. Once again, I have been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. You folks have yourselves a good night.